The interstellar council chamber had been built to dwarf egos, to remind every species gathered that no one power was greater than the assembly itself. The ceiling stretched beyond the sight of most eyes, glowing with shifting constellations drawn from the skies of countless worlds. Holographic banners hung in the air, each one displaying the crest of a civilization that had clawed its way to the stars. Delegates filled tiered seats circling the central platform, their forms as varied as the galaxies they hailed from, scaled, feathered, luminous, liquid, and solid. Conversations murmured in 100 tongues before falling silent as the latest session convened. Among them, in the shadow of Earth's modest insignia, stood a lone human. His uniform was crisp, his posture unshakable, his face unreadable. He was not a diplomat, not a scientist, not a polished voice of policy. He was a Navy SEAL, selected to stand guard, to embody the seriousness of Earth's presence. His orders were simple: observe, protect, and never speak unless required. The weight of countless gazes pressed against him, some amused, some dismissive, some openly hostile. Humanity was young, barely a generation into interstellar contact, and it had not yet earned respect. He remained still, hands clasped behind his back, his eyes forward, his breathing steady. Centuries of training distilled into the bearing of a soldier who neither needed nor desired the council's approval. He was there as iron presence, not persuasion. For many in the chamber, that made him an anomaly. For one in particular, it made him a target. The doors opened, and a ripple of sound swept the chamber. A galactic soldier of the Varkith Dominion entered, armor polished to a gleam, crest raised high. The Varkith were colossal beings, their frames layered with natural plating that gleamed like obsidian under the chamber lights. To them, war was heritage, dominance their birthright. They were notorious for treating other species as subjects, and they had made no effort to hide their contempt for Earth. When this warrior strode in, the crowd leaned forward, sensing spectacle. His heavy steps echoed across the platform as he approached the center. When he turned, his gaze fell not upon the dignitaries or the council speakers but directly on the lone human. A grin split his angular face, sharp teeth flashing. He raised his voice so that none in the chamber could mistake his words. "Is this what Earth calls strength? One fragile creature dressed in cloth, standing like it belongs here among warriors?" A low ripple of laughter spread through certain factions. Others remained silent, wary of where this confrontation might lead. The human did not flinch, did not lower his eyes. He had heard worse in training, endured worse in battlefields where silence was survival. His stillness was not weakness, it was restraint. The Varka soldier circled slowly, his tone growing louder, more mocking. He spoke of Earth's wars as petty skirmishes, of its history as brutish savagery without honor. He called humans children with weapons, tolerated only because the council demanded inclusivity. Every word was meant to provoke, to chip away at composure, to make the soldier falter before the galaxy. The seal gave him nothing. His jaw remained locked, his eyes fixed forward, his body motionless but for the measured rise and fall of his chest. That refusal to acknowledge, that refusal to grant satisfaction, struck a deeper nerve than any insult could. The Varkith warrior's grin faded into a sneer. He closed the distance until the height difference was undeniable, one towering figure of armored muscle against one unarmed human standing like stone. Then, with deliberate contempt, he lifted his hand. The motion was slow, exaggerated, meant for every eye to witness. The slap cracked like a thunderclap. Flesh against flesh, amplified by the chamber's acoustics, it reverberated across the hall and hung in the silence that followed. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the air, sharp enough to echo into the memory of every delegate. The human's head turned fractionally with the impact. That was all. No stagger, no retreat, no raised hand in return. He straightened instantly, eyes forward, spine unbroken. He did not touch his cheek, did not acknowledge the sting. The council chamber gasped in unison, some in shock, some in approval, some in uneasy fascination. The Varka stood smug, convinced the insult was complete. For him, the slap was victory, proof of dominance, proof of humanity's place at the bottom of the order. His posture loosened into arrogance as he turned slightly toward the gathered delegates, spreading his arms as though to say, "See? This is what humans are, asterisk." But in the charged stillness, in the 2 heartbeats of silence that followed, something began to shift. Delegates leaned forward, studying the human with new eyes. They expected anger, they expected shame, they expected collapse. Yet what they saw was different, unshaken calm, the aura of a predator not yet moved to act. The weight of the chamber pressed closer, tension tightening like a cord. The air felt charged, as if something unseen was coiling beneath the soldier's still frame. The Varkith did not notice. He basked in his performance, mistaking silence for submission. 2 seconds passed. That was all. And in that span, the galaxy had yet to realize the storm it had just summoned. The silence stretched, taut as a wire about to snap. Every gaze in the chamber fixed on the human. His head had turned slightly from the blow, but his stance remained unchanged. To most, that stillness looked like submission. To those who had trained for violence, it was something else entirely, a gathering storm, contained but lethal. 2 seconds. That was the span between insult and judgment. For the Varka soldier, those seconds were filled with smugness, a swell of arrogance that convinced him he had proven superiority before the galaxy. For the Navy SEAL, those seconds were an eternity of calculation. The slap was not just an insult, it was an escalation, a threat that required a response. And when a response came, it would not be symbolic. It would be final. The movement, when it began, was so fast that most delegates only saw the end of it. A shift of weight, a step angled just so, an arm driving upward with precision engineered through endless hours of training. The strike was not a wild swing. It was a chosen technique, the shortest path from potential to destruction. His fist connected beneath the Varkith's jaw, when natural plating thinned into a vulnerable seam. The impact rang out louder than the slap had. Bone and cartilage yielded in an instant, cracking beneath the sudden violence of human strength. The Varkith's head snapped backward, and the echo of shattering bone cut through the chamber like a gunshot. The entire audience froze as the towering soldier's body faltered. The human didn't hesitate, didn't gloat, didn't linger. His motion was pure continuation, fluid and controlled. The strike ended with him squared once again, balanced and ready for whatever followed. It had taken less than a breath. 1 heartbeat the Varkith was grinning in triumph, the next his skull was fractured, his body listing under the weight of mortal damage. The council chamber erupted. Some shouted in disbelief, others in outrage. Species unaccustomed to violence recoiled, their appendages curling tight. Warriors from other empires leaned forward with widened eyes, silently reassessing the fragile species they had dismissed as irrelevant. The delegates' voices rose into a storm of fear, awe, and confusion. The Varka soldier collapsed to the polished floor. His body struck with a heavy finality that left no doubt as to his fate. He twitched once, then stilled. His own kin stared in disbelief, their arrogance suddenly tempered by the reality of what had just happened. Their strongest warriors were feared throughout the spiral arms, yet a single unarmed human had felled one in less time than it took to draw a breath. The SEAL stood unmoving, his breathing controlled, his expression unreadable. He neither pressed the attack nor stepped away. He did not raise his voice, did not offer an explanation. He simply returned to his stance, shoulders squared, chin level, eyes forward. The message was clear enough without words. Alien guards at the chamber's edge hesitated, torn between instinct to avenge their fallen champion and fear of provoking the man who had just proved lethality with a single strike. They gripped weapons, but none advanced. They had seen the efficiency, the speed, the cold certainty. If one human could do this in open council, what would an army of them unleash on the battlefield? That unspoken calculation held them back more effectively than chains ever could. The silence that settled after the chaos was heavier than before. The echo of the shattered skull lingered in the minds of every delegate. Humanity had not begged for respect, had not bargained for recognition. It had demonstrated in undeniable terms what it meant to provoke them. The human's discipline was as striking as his violence. He had not launched into frenzy, had not pressed for further blood. He had delivered a single, perfect answer to the challenge placed before him, then stilled again. That restraint spoke louder than the strike itself. It revealed that humanity's danger was not in reckless aggression, but in controlled precision. Those 2 seconds had redrawn the order of perception in the chamber. Where once sat dismissal, there was fear. Where there had been scorn, there was a grudging respect. The slap was forgotten, swallowed whole by the devastating reply that followed. The legend forming in that instant was not about arrogance or insult. It was about the swiftness of human retaliation and the terrible clarity with which it was executed. The body of the Varkas soldier remained on the ground, lifeless. Delegates averted their eyes or stared, unwilling to believe yet unable to deny. The moment had branded itself into the Council's memory. A human had been struck before the galaxy, and in 2 seconds the galaxy had learned what that meant. The uproar did not end with the fall of the Varkas soldier. It spread like fire through dry fields, leaping from delegate to delegate, from world to world in the span of minutes. The chamber that once prided itself on order dissolved into chaos, voices clashing in dozens of languages, some raised in fury, others in awe, still more in fearful calculation. No one had expected such an outcome, and yet no one could deny the evidence lying motionless on the floor. Humanity had declared itself without uttering a word, and the declaration had been written in blood. The Varkas delegation rose as one, armored and seething. Their leader demanded immediate punishment, voice booming across the chamber, condemning Earth as reckless and barbaric. They demanded the humans' execution, framing the response as an insult to their empire's honor. Their words dripped with rage, but behind that fury lingered hesitation. For all their bluster, they had witnessed what one man had done in less than a breath. The cost of pressing further was suddenly much harder to measure. Other delegations joined the outcry. Some, bound by alliances with the Dominion, echoed the call for retribution. They pointed to humanity's youth, its untested place among the stars, arguing that such savagery proved Earth unfit for a seat at the table. But not all voices followed. Some spoke with caution, not condemnation. Civilizations with long histories of war recognized the subtle difference between an uncontrolled outburst and a precise act of survival. They whispered to one another, noting that the human had not attacked unprovoked. He had answered insult with finality, nothing more. The human representative, one of Earth's few diplomats permitted in the chamber, rose to speak only once. His words were measured, deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of unshaken calm. He stated that his soldier had endured humiliation without reaction, until struck. Only then had he responded, as any living being might when assaulted. Humanity would not apologize for survival, nor would it bow for defending dignity. He did not shout, he did not plead, he spoke as though the facts were stone, unalterable, undeniable. That composure unsettled the chamber further. There was no trace of fear in Earth's envoy, no wavering in his tone. Where other young civilizations might have scrambled to beg forgiveness or mitigate offense, humanity stood firm, as immovable as the soldier still at attention beside him. The Council was forced to grapple with a realization that unsettled its balance. This species was not pliant. It was not weak. It was not afraid. The deadlock that followed fractured along unexpected lines. Civilizations known for their rigid hierarchies leaned toward vengeance, afraid that allowing Earth's defiance would inspire rebellion among their own subjects. Others, particularly those with histories carved through bloodshed, urged restraint. They spoke of balance, of caution, of the danger of provoking a species capable of killing a Varkas warrior in the heart of the Council itself. The debate swelled, louder and sharper, but beneath the rhetoric ran the same current, a recalculation of humanity's place. Fear became the quiet constant. Delegates who had never once considered Earth a threat now asked themselves uncomfortable questions. If one soldier could crush a Varkas with bare hands, what might an army of them achieve? What engines of war had humanity forged in the silence of its backwater world? How far would this species go when pushed to fight for survival? The galaxy had no answers yet, and that ignorance bred unease more potent than the corpse lying at their feet. The news left the chamber before the session even ended. Couriers, encrypted signals, and whispered reports carried the story outward, each retelling sharpening the legend. By the time the debate still raged inside the council, outlying colonies and distant fleets were already speaking of the 2-second strike. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, but others clung to it, repeating it until it grew into something larger than truth, a symbol, a warning. Humanity was no longer a footnote. It was a question every empire now had to consider. The Varkith delegation swore vengeance, yet their threats no longer rang with certainty. The blow to their reputation was undeniable. Their fiercest soldiers were supposed to be untouchable, apex predators of the battlefield, and yet one lay broken at the hands of a single human. To strike back might restore honor, but it might also expose fragility further. Even rage could not erase that doubt. In the chaos, one fact stood unchallenged: the galaxy would not look at Earth the same again. The strike had shattered more than bone, it had fractured the assumptions of 1,000 civilizations. Where there had been dismissal, now stood respect born of fear. Where there had been scorn, there was the beginning of caution. In 2 seconds, humanity had forced its way into the center of the galactic stage, and no amount of shouting could erase what had been witnessed. The shock of the chamber did not fade quickly, because beneath the uproar a deeper question was taking root. What kind of species could produce a being who moved with such efficiency, who struck with such precision, who killed without hesitation and yet showed no hunger for more? The answer lay not in that single soldier, but in the nature of humanity itself. Humans were born on a world that demanded struggle from the first breath. Their planet was not gentle. It froze, it burned, it starved, it hunted. To survive there meant to adapt, to endure, to push back against forces that sought to erase them. Unlike many civilizations raised in stability or guided by protective environments, humans had risen through chaos. Every step of their history was forged in trial, storms, predators, scarcity, and war against their own kind. Where others avoided conflict, humans learned to sharpen themselves through it. That conditioning ran deeper than culture. It was carved into their instincts, into the marrow of their being. The Council now grappled with that truth. The Varkith had believed brute strength to be the pinnacle of survival. But humans embodied something more dangerous: versatility. They were not the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the most resilient physically. Yet they adapted with a relentlessness unmatched. Where an enemy was immune to one tactic, humans would invent another. Where resources were scarce, they would find a way to stretch them. Where death loomed inevitable, they would claw their way back and call it victory. That ability to improvise, to bend without breaking, made them unpredictable, and unpredictability was terror to empires built on control. The soldier in the chamber was not simply a warrior. He was the distilled result of centuries of honing violence into discipline. Humanity's militaries had been refined through countless wars. Some fought against themselves, some fought to prevent annihilation. The Navy SEAL was an apex of that refinement, trained to master not only weapons but also his own body, to fight in sea, sky, land, and void, to turn any environment into a battlefield and endure when others would collapse. He was one man, but he represented the depth of humanity's capacity for resilience. Delegates who once dismissed Earth as primitive now whispered calculations they had never considered before. If this was only one soldier, then what of the thousands like him? What of the armies humanity could raise, not only in numbers but in ingenuity? What machines of war did they already possess, hidden behind the quiet confidence their diplomat displayed? The questions spread like a contagion. Fear thrived in uncertainty, and humanity had just proved itself a species built on turning the uncertain into advantage. What unsettled the Council most was not merely the violence, but the control. The human had not lashed out in rage. He had not continued his assault, had not let emotion seize him. He had acted in the exact instant the line was crossed, then stopped as if the switch had been flicked off. That kind of discipline was terrifying, because it suggested intent rather than impulse. A being capable of harnessing violence without being consumed by it could not be dismissed as reckless. It had to be respected as dangerous. The perspective of seasoned warrior races shifted most dramatically. They knew the difference between rage and mastery. They knew the cold edge of efficiency when they saw it. The fear they felt was not for humanity's size or power, but for its mindset. They saw themselves mirrored in this species, but stripped of arrogance, distilled into something leaner, harder, more efficient. Some envoys, hardened veterans of their own empires, felt a reluctant kinship. Others felt dread, because they realized that humanity's rise would not be delayed by the usual levers of control. Threats would not cow them. Isolation would not weaken them. Violence would not erase them. The legend forming in whispers was no accident. It was the natural result of humanity's nature being displayed without embellishment. The Varkith had sought to humiliate, to prove dominance. What they achieved instead was unveiling the truth, that humans, underestimated and mocked, carried within them the instincts of predators who survived a death world. Their fragility was a disguise. Their true strength was the ability to strike decisively and survive the consequences. The chamber no longer debated whether Earth belonged. The real question became how to deal with what had been revealed. For some, the answer was alliance. Better to have such a species as a partner than an enemy. For others, it was containment, perhaps even eradication before humanity could grow too strong. But the seed had been planted, and no amount of denial could uproot it. Humanity's nature had been shown in a single, brutal moment, patient until struck, then lethal without hesitation. The galaxy would not forget it. The council did not adjourn quietly. What began as outrage and disbelief hardened into hours of deadlock, accusations flying across the chamber as the corpse of the Varkis soldier remained on the polished floor, a silent testament to what had transpired. Some demanded immediate execution of the human, citing law and precedent. Others argued that such punishment would not bring justice but ignite something far worse, a war humanity might not win outright, but one that would burn hotter than the galaxy was prepared to endure. The air thickened with tension, and for the first time in decades the Great Assembly could not reach consensus. When the ruling was finally delivered, it was born not of unity but necessity. The human would not be condemned. The Council framed it as de-escalation, an act of restraint for the sake of interstellar stability. Behind those words, however, the truth was plain. No one wanted to be the first to risk the consequences of provoking humanity further. The Varkith delegation erupted in protest, but their fury rang hollow. Even they recognized the fragility of their position. One of their champions had been felled too quickly, too easily. To demand blood risked exposing their own weakness if they failed to exact it. They left the chamber in silence more chilling than their earlier shouts. Beyond the chamber, the event spread with frightening speed. Couriers and transmissions carried the tale to distant colonies and fleets. By the time the human delegation returned to its quarters, the story was already transforming into legend. The details shifted with every retelling, but one constant remained: 2 seconds had defined the moment. 2 seconds of silence after the slap. 2 seconds before the response. That pause became the fulcrum upon which humanity's reputation now turned. Species across the stars whispered about those 2 seconds, some with awe, others with dread. For the soldier himself, there was nothing legendary about it. He remained silent, unchanged, his posture the same as it had been before the confrontation. When questioned, he offered no dramatization, no defense beyond the obvious truth: he had been struck, and he had responded. Where others saw myth, he saw instinct and training. Where others saw fearsome defiance, he saw discipline in action. His refusal to embellish only deepened the legend, for the galaxy prefers silence to shape its own narrative. The incident reshaped the calculus of empires. Worlds once indifferent to Earth began to reconsider alliances. To have humans as partners might mean gaining soldiers who fought with terrifying precision, soldiers who did not break under pressure. To have them as enemies could mean disaster on scales yet unimagined. Fleets recalibrated their assessments, intelligence agencies began compiling dossiers on human history, and war councils drafted plans that hedged for a species capable of turning insult into annihilation in the blink of an eye. The Varkith themselves, once boastful of their supremacy, grew quiet. Their leaders spoke of vengeance, but their commanders quietly shifted resources, reinforcing borders nearest to human space. Their pride had been struck as surely as their soldier's skull, but beneath that pride now lived caution. They had seen the cost of underestimation and were unwilling to pay it twice. In their silence, the rest of the galaxy heard confirmation: humans were not a minor nuisance but a power demanding respect. The myth of the 2 seconds grew until it ceased to be a mere story. On mining colonies, laborers retold it as a parable of defiance. In military academies of distant empires, instructors invoked it as a warning about provoking humans. On worlds where diplomacy meant survival, whispers of it served as reminder that Earth's quiet voice masked a fist ready to strike. No edict of the Council could erase what every witness had seen, and no propaganda could smother the truth that had taken root. The lesson was brutal, simple, and unforgettable. Humanity did not need to claim greatness. It did not need to declare itself with speeches or symbols. It needed only to act when tested, and the galaxy understood. They could be mocked, they could be struck, but the cost of doing so was higher than any empire wished to pay. 2 seconds had rewritten the balance of perception across the stars. 2 seconds had carved humanity a place at the table not through concession but through fear and respect. And in the silence that followed, as the Council recessed into uneasy quiet, one fact lingered with undeniable clarity: humanity's seat among the stars had been secured not by words, not by treaties, but by the demonstration that beneath their unassuming exterior beat the heart of predators who would never bow.